Imagine staring down the barrel of a firing squad. You're standing in this freezing public square in St. Petersburg. The soldiers have literally raised their rifles.
Right, the command of fire is just hovering right there in the icy air.
Exactly. And you are 28 years old, and, with absolute certainty that you have exactly 1 minute left to live.
Just a minute to process the end of everything.
Yeah, and then at the very last possible second, a breathless messenger arrives. Your sentence has been commuted. You aren't going to die today.
Oh, wow. Talk about emotional whiplash.
Seriously. But instead of death, you're going to be stripped of everything you are, marched in shackles across a frozen continent, and sent to a literal hell on earth.
And this isn't, some theoretical thought experiment or a movie plot.
No, not at all. This is the documented real-life experience of Fyodor Dostoevsky in December of 1849.
Which is arguably the most dramatic turning point in all of literary history. It really is. So, welcome to your deep dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in the world of the House of the Dead, which is Dostoevsky's semi-autobiographical masterpiece about his time in a Siberian prison camp.
It's such a heavy text, but so incredibly rich.
Oh, absolutely. And our mission today is to trace this psychological and philosophical metamorphosis. We want to understand how descending into the absolute darkest depths of human existence fundamentally shattered a man's worldview.
And more importantly, how he managed to rebuild a new, far more profound understanding of human nature out of all that wreckage.
Exactly. But to really grasp the magnitude of this philosophical shattering, we first have to, understand the philosophical tower he had built for himself before the arrest.
Right, we have to look at the why. Like, why was this young, brilliant writer facing a firing squad in the first place?
Right, because he wasn't exactly a hardened criminal.
No, not at all. He was part of something called the Petrashevsky Circle, which was basically this gathering of progressive, utopian, socialist intellectuals. Yeah, and in the 1840s, the Russian nobility had this profound, almost paralyzing sense of guilt regarding the institution of serfdom.
They really did. It defined a whole generation of thinkers.
So you had these highly educated, wealthy young men sitting in comfortable St. Petersburg salons, reading banned European books and just agonizing over the millions of Russian peasants living in effective slavery.
And they completely idealized the peasant class. They viewed them as these noble, innocent sufferers.
Right, like they could do no wrong.
Exactly. They were heavily influenced by French utopian thinkers, particularly a guy named Charles Fourier.
Fourier, right, the phalansteries guy.
That's the one. He envisioned a perfect society based on communal living spaces called phalansteries, basically where everyone would live together in perfect harmony, sharing labor and resources.
It sounds nice on paper, I guess.
Well, Dostoevsky and his circle genuinely believed it. They thought that if they could just educate the peasants and overthrow the Tsarist system, the Russian poor would naturally embrace this socialist utopia.
So they were plotting a revolution of the mind and potentially a literal revolt to make it happen.
Exactly. But the Tsar, Nicholas I, was watching Europe explode with revolutions in 1848, and he was taking zero chances.
Yeah, he was not messing around.
No. The secret police infiltrated the Petrashevsky Circle, rounded them all up, and subjected them to that horrific sham execution.
Which, by the way, is a psychological torture all its own.
Oh, absolutely.
They actually tied the first 3 men to the posts and put hoods over their heads. Dostoevsky was in the second batch, so he watched his friends agonizing for what they thought were their final seconds of life.
And that psychological cruelty was entirely intentional. It was designed to break their spirits before the actual sentence was delivered.
Which was 4 years of hard labor in a military prison camp in Omsk, Siberia, followed by indefinite exile as a private in the army.
It's just a staggering punishment.
And when Dostoevsky finally returns from Siberia years later and wants to write about this crucible, he runs into a massive roadblock.
Right, because the censors...
Yeah, the Tsarist censors are not going to allow a former political prisoner, a known revolutionary, to publish a scathing non-fiction expose on the horrors of the Siberian penal system.
So he creates this brilliant, albeit pretty transparent, literary facade.
He packages his experience not as a memoir, but as a novel.
Right. He presents the text as the quote-unquote found notes of a fictional nobleman named Alexander Petrovich Goryanchikov.
Goryanchikov. It's quite a name.
It is. And to ensure this narrator appears completely unpolitical to the censors, he gives him a shocking, violent backstory. He claims this Goryanchikov is serving 10 years because he murdered his wife, in a fit of jealousy.
It's a genius move, honestly, but reading through the analysis, it's clear Dostoevsky barely bothers to keep up the charade.
Not at all.
The other convicts in the book constantly treat the narrator like a political exile, not a crime of passion murderer. His contemporary readers in the 1860s saw right through the veil.
Oh, everyone knew. They knew they were reading Dostoevsky's own raw, unfiltered observations.
And those observations begin with the immediate, visceral shock of the prison itself. The physical reality of the dead house, as he called it, was just staggering.
Yeah. Try to imagine an irregular hexagon-shaped courtyard, entirely enclosed by a massive fence made of 1,500 high wooden posts.
Sharpened at the top, driven deep into the frozen earth.
Exactly. It was a world entirely severed from the rest of humanity.
I try to picture the conditions inside those barracks, and the details are just stomach-turning.
They really are.
He arrives in the dead of winter, and the cold in Siberia is lethal, like 40 degrees below zero.
The mercury in the thermometers literally freezes.
Right, and inside these single-story log barracks, the floors are rotting, covered in an inch of filth. The windows have an inch of ice built up on the inside of the glass.
And the crowding. He describes them being packed together like herrings in a barrel.
There's bodies everywhere.
250 men. Murderers, smugglers, thieves, political exiles, all locked in a single room from dusk till dawn.
They slept on bare wooden planks, right?
Yeah, 30 men side by side on a single continuous platform. The air was thick with the suffocating fumes of the charcoal stoves.
Which provided choking smoke, but barely any actual heat.
Exactly, and it was crawling with vermin, fleas, lice, and black beeters by the bushel.
Ugh. You read about the cabbage soup they were served, which was mostly just warm water with cockroaches floating in it.
And the convicts would just eat the soup, totally indifferent to the insects.
Because they were starving. But, the physical horror, as bad as it is, feels almost secondary to the psychological environment.
How so?
Well, I keep thinking about this analogy. Imagine being stuck in a crowded, broken elevator. You know that suffocating, panic-inducing feeling of being trapped inches away from strangers?
Oh yeah, it's awful.
The smells, the noise, the sheer inability to just take a single step backward into your own space. Now imagine that elevator is freezing cold and you are stuck in it not for a few hours, but for 4 solid years.
But that captures the psychological torture perfectly. The absolute, unyielding deprivation of privacy.
It's just unfathomable.
Dostoevsky writes that never, not for one single minute in those entire 4 years, was he ever alone.
Always with an armed guard at work, and always surrounded by 200 hostile convicts in the barracks.
For a highly sensitive, educated, introverted intellectual, this forced life in common was an agony that totally eclipsed the physical labor.
Which brings us to the most crushing irony of his entire situation. Think about the utopian socialist ideals he held before he was arrested.
Right, the Phalansteries.
Yeah. He and his friends worshipped Charles Fourier. They dreamed of perfect, harmonious communal living.
The universe really does have a very dark sense of humor.
It does.
Dostoevsky wanted communal living with the peasants, and the Tsarist government basically gave it to him.
Be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. But the reality check was utterly brutal. He discovers almost instantly that forced communal living isn't a utopia. It is a psychological nightmare that grinds the human soul to dust.
Let me push back on that for a second, though, or at least hazard a guess as to what a naive observer might expect.
Sure, go ahead.
You have these noblemen and these peasants all thrown into the exact same hell. They are all stripped of their rights. They're all wearing the same scratchy two-tone jackets. They all have half their heads shaved, and they are all chained in heavy iron fetters.
Right.
Doesn't that extreme shared suffering become an equalizer? Wouldn't it forge some kind of brotherhood of the oppressed?
It's a completely logical assumption.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's exactly what Dostoevsky himself likely hoped for.
But I'm guessing that didn't happen.
It couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
The peasant convicts absolutely despised the noblemen. They viewed them with an active, vindictive, almost joyous hostility.
Wow. Joyous hostility.
Yeah. The class divide, he realizes, is an unbridgeable chasm.
Because to the peasants, the nobles aren't fellow victims, they are an alien species.
Precisely. You have to remember, centuries of serfdom. The peasants have been owned, beaten, and sold by the nobility for generations.
Right, so the resentment is deep.
So when a nobleman suddenly falls from grace and ends up in shackles beside them, the peasants don't feel sympathy. They feel a dark, retributive satisfaction.
There are these taunts from the peasant convicts that just cut to the bone. They look at the nobles struggling with the labor and say, "You wouldn't embroider with gold, so now you break stones on the road."
Or, "You have beaks of iron, you've pecked us to death."
They actively relish seeing the soft, pampered gentlemen suffer.
And the nobles do suffer more, physically. They just aren't conditioned for grueling manual labor.
Right, they've spent their lives in salons.
Exactly. They are physically weaker, their hands bleed, they collapse from exhaustion, and the peasants mock them mercilessly for it.
So the peasants don't see Dostoevsky as a fallen comrade who tried to liberate them.
Not at all. They see him as an oppressor who is finally getting a tiny fraction of what he actually deserves.
This environment does something profound, which the literary analysis really zeroes in on. It doesn't just strip away your physical comfort, it systematically strips away your entire identity. When those heavy wooden gates close behind you, your past evaporates. Your social status, your family name, your brilliant literary achievements, none of it exists anymore.
And in fact, clinging to those things only makes you a bigger target.
Yeah. It forces a descent into a deeply painful internal silence.
It's true. When you are violently stripped of every external marker that tells the world, and yourself, who you are forced to confront a terrifying existential void.
What is left of Fyodor Dostoevsky when you take away the fame, the money, the title, and the respect?
He realizes that so much of what he considered his self was purely circumstantial.
He is thrown into this philosophical vacuum. He can't rely on his old socialist theories because the reality of the barracks just burned them to ash.
And he can't rely on his status because he's at the very bottom of the social hierarchy.
So he has no choice but to retreat inward and just observe, to watch this raw, unfiltered, vicious mass of humanity and try to figure out what actually makes a human being tick.
And what he observes over those 4 years completely dismantles the prevailing philosophical theories of his era. This is really where the foundation of all his great later works is poured.
To understand the magnitude of this, we need to talk about the theory that everyone back in the salons of St. Petersburg believed. The theory he went into prison believing.
Right. In the mid-19th century, the dominant philosophy among progressive Russian intellectuals, championed by thinkers like Nikolai Chernyshevsky, was something called rational egoism.
Rational egoism. It sounds very clinical.
It is entirely clinical. It's a highly deterministic, almost mechanical view of human nature.
Okay.
The core idea is that human beings are fundamentally rational machines. We are products of our environment, and every single action we take is dictated by a rational pursuit of our own self-interest.
So we are biologically programmed to seek pleasure and avoid pain.
Exactly.
It makes me think of modern algorithmic models. Rational egoism basically treats a human being like an algorithm optimizing for the highest score in a video game.
That's a great way to put it.
If you offer the algorithm a choice between a reward and a penalty, it will always mathematically choose the reward. Therefore, if someone commits a crime, it's just because society has presented them with a flawed set of incentives.
That is exactly the logic Chernyshevsky used. He argued that if you just structure society correctly, if you build what he called the crystal palace, where everyone's material needs are met, and you educate people on their true, logical self-interest, then crime, irrational behavior, and suffering will simply cease to exist.
Because no rational machine would choose to suffer if a better option were available.
Precisely.
It's an incredibly clean, optimistic theory. It's the kind of pristine philosophy you invent when you're sitting in a plush armchair drinking tea.
Oh, absolutely.
But Dostoevsky takes this human algorithm theory into a Siberian prison camp, applies it to a room full of 250 murderers, smugglers, and sociopaths, and realizes it is hopelessly, laughably wrong.
Because the behavior of the convicts defies every single principle of rational egoism.
Right.
If humans are just rational machines seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, you cannot explain the illicit economy of the prison, let alone what they do with the proceeds.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the illicit economy is fascinating. It's incredible how human enterprise finds a way, even in a maximum security void.
They were basically running a whole underground city.
Under the noses of the guards, the convicts are running a massive black market. They are smuggling vodka into the camp in ox guts wrapped around their waists.
Yeah, ox guts. It's wild.
They're sneaking out at night, there's hidden prostitution, there are secret trades being plied.
They even had a resident pawnbroker. a Jewish convict named Isaiah Fomich who lent out money at exorbitant interest rates and kept everyone's meager saving.
Which is just an absurd image, a fully functioning banking system operating on the rotting floorboards of a Siberian barracks.
It really is.
Now, a rational egoist would look at this black market and say, perfectly logical. These men are suffering material deprivation, so they are rationally breaking the rules to accumulate wealth, to buy better food, or bribe the guards for warmer clothes.
And sometimes that is exactly what they did. But Dostoevsky noticed a recurring pattern of behavior that shattered the rational egoist model completely.
This is the part that blows my mind.
He observed a phenomenon that he spent pages analyzing.
The binge. This is one of the most profound psychological insights I took away from the analysis. Let's paint the picture of the binge.
Okay, let's do it.
You have a convict who is, for all intents and purposes, a slave. He works exhausting, back-breaking labor in the freezing cold for months on end.
Every single day.
And in his few spare moments, he painstakingly saves up every single copper coin he can scrounge. He smuggles, he hoards, he deprives himself of small comforts just to build up this little secret fortune.
So he spends half a year acting like the ultimate rational, calculating economic machine.
Right. And then a holiday arrives. And what does he do? He blows every single coin in a spectacular, chaotic 24-hour explosion.
Just absolute chaos.
He buys smuggled vodka at a huge markup. He hires a fiddler to literally follow him around the muddy courtyard playing music.
The fiddler detail always gets me.
It's so theatrical. He swaggers through the barracks, drunk out of his mind and demanding respect from the other convicts, insulting the guards. He might buy a fancy silk shirt, parade around in it for an hour, and then sell it for a fraction of what he paid just to buy more vodka. He spends everything.
And we must emphasize, he knows exactly what the outcome of this behavior will be. This isn't a miscalculation.
He knows. He knows that when the sun comes up the next day, he will have a skull-crushing hangover. He knows his pockets will be entirely empty.
And he knows he has to start the brutal, miserable cycle of saving coppers all over again.
And most importantly, he knows that by getting roaring drunk and causing a scene, he is practically guaranteeing that he will be dragged out and severely flogged by the guards.
So let's look at this through the lens of our algorithm analogy.
Okay.
The algorithm has spent 6 months optimizing for resources. And then deliberately, it crashes the car into a brick wall, sets the resources on fire, and triggers a massive pain penalty. Why?
A rational egoist looks at that convict and says, well, this man is malfunctioning. He is uneducated. He doesn't understand his own self-interest.
Right.
But Dostoevsky looks at him and realizes the man understands his interest perfectly. It's just that his primary interest isn't comfort or pleasure.
Dostoevsky synthesizes this into a paradigm-shifting realization. He writes that money in prison is coined liberty.
Coined liberty.
It is the physical, tangible manifestation of freedom. The convict doesn't engage in this chaotic binge because he calculates it will bring him a net positive of physical pleasure. He does it because it is a desperate, explosive assertion of his own crushed personality.
It is the human soul screaming, I am not a machine.
Exactly. In an environment where every single aspect of your existence is controlled. When you wake, what you eat, where you swing your pickaxe, when you sleep, you are reduced to a piano key. You are a cog.
And the human spirit cannot survive that kind of mechanical submission.
The binge is an act of pure defiance. It is a way for the convict to prove to himself that he still has a will of his own. He can choose to destroy his own painfully built wealth simply because he wants to.
He chooses irrational chaos over rational submission because the chaos belongs to him.
That's beautifully put.
It's like the player in the video game getting so sick of following the optimized path that they deliberately drive the car backward off a cliff just to see the physics engine break, just to prove they're the ones holding the controller.
This realization becomes the absolute bedrock of Dostoevsky's mature philosophy. He realizes that freedom, the raw, irrational, unconstrained capacity to exercise one's own will, is more essential to human biology than rational self-interest.
Human beings do not just want to be comfortable.
No. They demand to be free, even if that freedom actively hurts them, even if it brings them pain instead of pleasure. We will sabotage our own utopias just to prove we aren't slaves to reason.
This psychological need for agency connects perfectly to his observations about the nature of the forced labor itself. Dostoevsky essentially conducts a 4-year sociological study on work.
And he figures out what the ultimate soul-destroying punishment would be. And surprisingly, it isn't physical torture.
No, physical torture targets the body. Dostoevsky realizes that if you want to completely annihilate a man, to crush his spirit so utterly that even the most hardened sociopathic murderer would tremble at the thought, you don't beat him.
You force him to perform completely, utterly meaningless labor.
Meaningless labor. We aren't talking about hard labor. We are talking about being ordered to move a massive pile of dirt from one side of the courtyard to the other.
And when it's done, being ordered to move it back to the exact spot it started.
Pouring water from one wooden bucket into another and then back again. Pounding sand, day after day.
The distinction he makes here is crucial. Dostoevsky notes that the actual work the convicts did, like baking alabaster, breaking up old barges, making bricks in the freezing cold, it was brutal, exhausting work. But it had a purpose.
The convict could see the tangible result of his sweat.
Right, a brick was made. A barge was dismantled. There is an innate, almost subconscious dignity in the completion of a rational task, even if the labor is forced upon you. A convict might even take a grim pride in doing the work well or doing it faster than the others.
Because it still engages the creative, productive faculty of the human mind.
Exactly.
But meaningless work completely severs the action from the outcome. It strips away the very last drop of human dignity. It reduces a man entirely to a beast of burden.
When you force a man to move dirt back and forth, the institution is essentially telling his soul, your effort means nothing, your time means nothing, your existence is entirely void of purpose.
It is the ultimate deprivation of agency. It's the myth of Sisyphus weaponized by the penal system.
And it proves, once again, that human beings require meaning and purpose just as desperately as they require food and shelter. Without a sense of purpose, the mind simply collapses into madness.
So we're seeing how this environment forces Dostoevsky to strip human nature down to its studs, but it also forces him to confront the macro structures of society, specifically the justice system.
Which brings us to a massive, almost unsolvable philosophical puzzle regarding the law.
Right. If we accept how complex and subjective human psychology is, how can the law ever claim to be truly fair?
It's the problem of what we might call the incalculable math of punishment.
I love that phrase, the incalculable math.
On paper, the legal system aims for objective equality. If two men commit the same crime, say a violent robbery, the law dictates they both receive a 10-year sentence to hard labor. The scales of justice balance. Society assumes the punishment has been applied equally.
But let's bring that into a modern context for a second to really feel the weight of what Dostoevsky is arguing. Think about a flat fine. If the penalty for speeding is a $500 ticket, the law is objective. But if a billionaire gets a $500 ticket, it's not even a mild annoyance.
They don't even notice it.
Right. If a single mother working minimum wage gets a $500 ticket, it means her children might not eat that week. The objective law creates vastly subjective suffering. Dostoevsky sees this exact dynamic play out with the prison sentences.
He observes two men serving the exact same 10-year sentence, but the actual punishment they experience is worlds apart.
Take a peasant convict who has lived his entire life in grinding, desperate poverty.
He may have grown up in constant starvation, regularly beaten by his master, working himself to the bone just to survive the Russian winter.
For him, arriving in the Siberian prison camp might shockingly be a step up in his quality of life.
Right. The convicts actually bragged about how good the prison bread was.
Wow.
For a starving peasant, the camp guarantees him food. It gives him a warm place to sleep, even if it's crowded and filthy. He is surrounded by other peasants, what he might consider a spirited club of companions.
For this man, the 10-year sentence is just a change of scenery. He might actually be happier inside the dead house than outside it.
But then you contrast that exact same sentence with the experience of an educated man, an intellectual, a nobleman, or someone with an awakened, sensitive conscience.
For this man, the physical shock of the labor and the cold is terrible, but the mental anguish is what actively destroys him.
That's isolation.
The active, venomous hatred from the peasant convicts around him.
The overwhelming, crushing guilt of his own conscience reflecting on his crimes.
For the educated man, those same 10 years are an absolute mind-shattering agony. He wastes away like a candle left burning in a draft.
Dostoevsky realizes that the profound subjectivity of human suffering makes objective legal fairness an illusion.
You simply cannot weigh the ache of a human heart on a judicial scale.
The law can only punish the physical body, but the mind experiences the punishment entirely differently based on the architecture of its past.
It's a really sobering thought. And speaking of punishing the body, we have to talk about the physical horrors of the camp. Corporal punishment.
This is where the deep dive gets intensely dark.
It does, but we have to go there to understand the psychological insights he pulls from it. The punishment of the lash. The green street.
The green street was the colloquial term for running the gauntlet. A convict sentenced to this would be stripped to the waist, his hands tied to a rifle so he couldn't protect himself, and forced to walk slowly between two long rows of soldiers.
Sometimes hundreds of them.
Each soldier was armed with a heavy stick or a soaked birch switch. As the convict walked, every single soldier would strike his bare back.
It is horrifying beyond words. It's barbaric.
Truly.
But the psychological mechanism Dostoevsky extracts from observing this is totally counterintuitive. We read these accounts of convicts who have been sentenced to the lash. They were sitting in the lockup, waiting for the day their punishment is scheduled to be carried out. And suddenly, inexplicably, just days before they are supposed to run the gauntlet, they commit a massive, violent new crime. They will lunge at a guard and stab him, or violently attack an officer.
Which, if we go back to our rational algorithm, is absolute insanity.
Exactly. It makes zero rational sense. By committing a severe violent crime while already in custody, they guarantee a new trial.
And that new trial will undoubtedly result in their ultimate sentence being vastly increased.
They might add a decade to their hard labor. Why would anyone willingly do that?
Because Dostoevsky realizes that the human nervous system cannot handle the psychology of anticipation.
The anticipation.
The physical agony of the flogging is a terror, certainly. But the waiting? The endless hours sitting in a dark cell, knowing the torture is coming, imagining the pain, feeling completely powerless to stop the clock. That anticipation is what actually breaks the mind.
The dread of the inevitable.
Yes. The dread becomes so overwhelmingly toxic that the convict will do literally anything to change the timeline and regain a scrap of agency.
Even if it costs them 10 years.
By committing a new crime, they force the legal bureaucracy to halt the impending punishment. The authorities have to hold a new trial, process new paperwork, which delays the flogging by a few weeks or months.
They are willing to trade 10 years of future abstract suffering just to escape the immediate, crushing psychological terror of the present moment. They assert their will to control when they suffer.
And this brilliant observation of the victims brings us to the other side of the lash. Dostoevsky didn't just study the psychology of the men being beaten.
Right.
He turned his analytical eye on the men holding the sticks, the officers, the executioners.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is a crucial pivot. He identifies a specific archetype of man that he calls the gentleman torturer.
Yes, the gentleman torturer.
And he looks closely at characters like Lieutenant Zerebiatnikov. This wasn't an officer who simply administered corporal punishment as a grim bureaucratic duty. Zerebiatnikov relished it. He turned the administration of pain into a sadistic, psychological, theatrical performance.
The way Dostoevsky describes Zerebiatnikov's methodology is chilling. A terrified convict, scheduled for the sticks, would be brought before him. The man is trembling, begging for mercy.
And the lieutenant wouldn't yell. Instead, he would put on this incredibly sympathetic, mournful face.
He plays the benevolent father figure.
Yeah. He says to the convict, "My dear friend, you know it's not me punishing you, it's the law. Do you think it gives me any pleasure to see a fellow man beaten? I am a human being too, shall I have mercy on you?"
And the convict, grasping at this tiny lifeline, practically weeps with gratitude. "Yes, Your Honor. Be a father to me. I'll pray for your soul all my life."
And then Zerebiatnikov draws out the suspense. He says, "Well, okay, I will let you off this time, but wait, what if I'm actually doing you harm? What if you go out and commit another crime because I was too soft on you?"
Just twisting the knife.
And he goes back and forth, torturing the man with hope, watching the hope rise and fall in the man's eyes. And then right at the climax of this psychological game, he suddenly drops the mask, his face twists into a snarl, he turns to the soldiers and he screams, "Flog him, flay him, burn him."
It is pure, refined psychological sadism. He feeds on the emotional whiplash of the victim.
It's sick.
Dostoevsky also profiles the prison warden, a man the convicts called Major Eight Eyes. The major was a man who flew into savage, purple-faced rages and beat men mercilessly for the absolute slightest perceived infraction.
A button unfastened, a look he didn't like.
He was intoxicated by the sheer terror his presence inspired in the courtyard.
So what is the philosophical conclusion Dostoevsky draws from watching these gentlemen torturers? He doesn't just write them off as inherently evil monsters, does he?
No, and that's the genius of his analysis. He treats them as subjects of a sociological pathology.
Okay, pathology.
He concludes that tyranny is not just a character flaw. It is a habit that develops into a literal physiological disease. When a human being is handed absolute unchecked power over the body and soul of another human being, it corrupts their nervous system.
It intoxicates the blood like a narcotic.
The power itself is the contagion.
Wow.
Exactly. Dostoevsky argues that the lust for power, the ability to inflict pain on another creature made in the image of God without consequence, inevitably coarsens the mind. It hardens the heart. The blood requires higher and higher doses of the narcotic to feel the same thrill.
He warns that even the very best, most moral of men can be corrupted and eventually destroyed by this unlimited mastery.
And he extrapolates this from the individual to the macro level. He warns that a society that tolerates this, a society that builds its institutions on a foundation of absolute power, corporal punishment, and the subjugation of its citizens, is infecting itself at its very roots.
It is a disease that actively destroys civic feeling, mutual trust, and basic human empathy.
It's a profound political and moral warning that echoes far beyond the walls of the Siberian camp.
It really forces you to look at the power dynamics in any system, even modern ones, and ask where that disease might be taking root.
Absolutely.
But, we've spent a lot of time in the darkness, the despair, the cruelty, the torture. We need to pivot, because if the dead house was just a place of unmitigated evil, Dostoevsky would have just died of a broken heart.
He would have.
But it wasn't just a slaughterhouse of souls. It was a place of profound, baffling, beautiful contradictions.
Yes. To understand his philosophical rebirth, we have to examine how this environment completely shattered his preconceived binary notions of good and evil.
Dostoevsky uses the prison as a laboratory to prove a fundamental point. The human heart is far too vast and contradictory to be easily categorized.
He introduces us to this incredible tragic cast of characters. If someone says the word murderer, we all picture a very specific archetype in our heads, a violent sociopathic thug.
But Dostoevsky walks us through the barracks and says, no, crime cannot be interpreted from conventional, comfortable points of view.
So let's look at the incredible spectrum of humanity he documents. On one end, you have a character like Sirotkin. By all accounts, Sirotkin is a gentle, mild-mannered, almost painfully shy young boy.
He is described as pure, with beautiful eyes that glowed with a genuine indignation at injustice. He despised the coarse, violent, drunken life of the military.
And yet, how does this gentle boy end up in a maximum security Siberian prison? He murdered his commanding officer.
The officer was brutally abusing him. The bureaucracy ignored his pleas, and the boy simply snapped. The human mind broke under the pressure, and he committed an atrocity.
Then you have a man like Petrov, a strong, intensely determined, resolute man who also killed his officer for a blow. Petrov's relationship with Dostoevsky is fascinating.
He is deeply devoted to the frail writer.
He helps him, he washes him in the bathhouse, he acts as a protector.
And then one day, Petrov casually steals Dostoevsky's incredibly precious, cherished Bible, one of the only possessions he has, and sells it for booze.
And he does it without a single hint of malice. He just needed the money for a drink, saw an asset, and took it. He genuinely couldn't understand why Dostoevsky was upset.
Right, the complete compartmentalization of loyalty and theft.
It's so strange.
And then there's the old believer, a deeply pious elderly man. He is universally respected by every single hardened criminal in the prison for his serenity, his wisdom, and his unshakable faith.
But why is this holy man in shackles?
Because his intense religious zeal drove him to burn down an Orthodox church. His faith made him an arsonist.
And then, on the absolute terrifying end of the spectrum, you have Gazin, the gigantic Tatar vodka smuggler. When Gazin is sober, he is quiet, almost remarkably well-behaved.
But when he gets drunk, the mask slips and he becomes a murderous, uncontrollable monster.
The dark rumor that floated around the prison was that before he was caught, Gazin used to murder little children, purely for the sadistic thrill of feeling their warm blood on his hands.
Just absolute chilling depravity. And speaking of chilling, there is the aristocratic parasite.
Oh, this guy.
A young nobleman who is in prison for murdering his own father to secure his inheritance. What shocked Dostoevsky was that this young man was perfectly cheerful. He was constantly making jokes, completely devoid of any conscience, guilt, or remorse.
He even cheerfully gossiped about his father's failing health before the murder.
Though it is a fascinating historical footnote. Dostoevsky later learned, after he had already published the first chapters of House of the Dead, that this young nobleman was actually entirely innocent.
Really?
Yeah, he had been falsely accused and framed, and the real murderers were eventually found.
Oh.
Dostoevsky includes this update in a later chapter, noting how his own intuition that something was off about the man's complete lack of guilt was actually correct. He wasn't a sociopath, he was just innocent.
Which just adds another layer to the impossibility of judging the people in there. The prison is full of men who utterly defy simple categorization. And this brings us to one of the most haunting and beautiful observations in the text.
It's the realization of the duality of man. The shattering understanding that a human being can be a brutal, violent criminal and simultaneously capable of immense, unprompted tenderness.
There is a specific scene in the prison hospital that perfectly illustrates this shattering of the binary. It's an unforgettable image.
It really is. You have a young convict named Mikhailov. He is dying of consumption, tuberculosis. He is in the final, agonizing stages, wasting away to literally nothing but bone and pale skin.
And despite the fact that he is on his deathbed, barely able to draw a breath, the authorities refuse to remove his heavy iron fetters. He is literally dying in chains.
It was a senseless, cruel, bureaucratic regulation. A convict remained fettered until the very moment of death.
So Mikhailov is taking his last rattling breaths. And right beside his bed is another convict, a hardened, violent man, a criminal covered in the raised scars of the lash.
And what is this violent criminal doing? He is sitting there, silently and with infinite tenderness, waiting on the dying boy.
He is bringing him water, gently wiping the sweat from his brow, carefully turning his emaciated body to ease his pain.
And we have to ask why. He isn't doing it for a reward. There is no money to be had. He isn't doing it to show off to the guards or curry favor. He is acting out of pure, deep, unadulterated human compassion.
How do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile the violence of this man's past with the pure, selfless grace of his actions at the deathbed?
Dostoevsky realizes you can't. Not if you insist on dividing the world neatly into good people and evil people.
The extreme environment of the prison acts as a massive magnifying glass. It burns away the polite, hypocritical conventions of high society and reveals the raw, contradictory human soul underneath.
And what Dostoevsky sees is that humans are capable of the darkest, most unfathomable depravity, like Gazin or the sadistic guards, but they're also capable of the most sublime grace.
And terrifyingly, beautifully, both of those capacities often exist within the exact same person.
It makes the act of judging another human being incredibly complex. It forces a profound, almost paralyzing humility upon him.
Because Dostoevsky realizes he cannot look at another person, even a murderer, and easily declare them a monster. Because he doesn't know what immense capacity for love or self-sacrifice or a deep spiritual agony is hidden beneath their hardened, scarred exterior.
This realization is the ultimate pivot point of Dostoevsky's philosophical transformation. It is the beginning of his rebirth, which leads us to ask, how does a mind survive this realization and this environment without collapsing into nihilism?
Right. We have to talk about survival, hope, and resurrection. How does anyone survive years of the cold, the labor, the cruelty, the filth, and the complete loss of identity without just giving up and dying?
Dostoevsky concludes that human beings are sustained by exactly one thing, and it isn't food and it isn't warmth. It is hope.
He writes that the prisoner is a great dreamer. Without hope, a man ceases to be human and becomes a beast. The entire psychological architecture of the convict is built around the anticipation of freedom.
And what's fascinating is that this hope is biologically necessary, even if it is a complete mathematical illusion.
Yes. You read about these men who have 20-year sentences. They are already 40 years old. Their bodies are broken. And yet they talk constantly with utter conviction about what they are going to do when they get out at age 60.
They fully believe they will be as young and vigorous as they are now. They refuse, on a cellular level, to accept their current reality as permanent.
Dostoevsky recounts a staggering example of this from his time in Tobolsk, which was a way station before he reached Omsk. He saw a convict who had been chained to a wall.
Chained to a wall?
A heavy iron chain, 7 feet long, attached to his bed. The man had been living on that chain for 5 years, and he would be there for several years more.
And the man was completely calm, content, almost cheerful.
Why? Because he was intensely anxious for the end of his time on the chain. Now, he knew full well that when the chain was eventually removed, his sentence dictated that he would never be allowed out of the prison walls. He would remain confined to the compound until the day he died.
But his entire universe of hope had shrunk down and focused entirely on the moment he would simply be able to walk across the prison yard without the chain dragging behind him.
That tiny, incremental, almost meaningless hope kept his mind from fracturing into madness.
The convicts survive by looking outward, toward an impossible horizon. In the spring, when the harsh Siberian weather finally breaks, Dostoevsky watches the men stand by the massive wooden fence.
They press their faces to the chinks in the wood, looking out at the vast, green, infinitely free Siberian steppes.
They dream of tramping, of running away into the forest, living as outlaws in the wild.
Very few ever actually attempt to escape, but the dream of escape, the hope of asserting their freedom, acts as a spiritual oxygen that keeps their souls alive.
So we arrive at the culmination of our mission today. We asked at the beginning, how did this descent into the dead house fundamentally shatter and rebuild Fyodor Dostoevsky's philosophy? What does this all mean for him as a thinker and eventually as one of the greatest novelists in history?
Let's trace the arc. He walks into the dead house as a naive, armchair socialist. He loved humanity in the abstract. He loved the idea of the poor, oppressed masses.
But when he was actually forced into the squalor, forced to live elbow to elbow with the reality of the people, he was repulsed.
He was disgusted by their coarseness, their smell, their violence, their cruelty, and their active hatred of him. He viewed them initially as a terrifying collective mass of brutality.
But he walks out of the dead house 4 years later completely transformed. He doesn't hold on to that disgust. He doesn't become a bitter, hateful elitist. Instead, he develops a profound, almost terrifying reverence for those exact same people.
How does that shift happen?
It happens through the accumulation of everything we've discussed, by observing the contradictions.
He sees the violent murderer tenderly nursing the dying man. He sees the innate, unshakable dignity of the old believer.
He witnesses the desperate, irrational binge that proves the unquenchable human thirst for freedom. And slowly, he stops looking at them as a collective socioeconomic class.
You start seeing the individual tragedies.
Yes. He recognizes the immense, crushed potential within them. He realizes that the harsh environment, the brutal history of serfdom, and the sadistic penal system have deeply scarred and obscured their humanity, but it has not destroyed it.
There's one incredibly powerful moment that captures this philosophical resurrection perfectly. It's the Easter service.
The Easter service is the emotional climax of his entire experience. Once a year, the convicts are allowed to attend church in the town.
They are marched in, dressed in their ragged prison uniforms, their heavy iron chains clanking violently against the stone floor with every step.
They are kept at the very back of the church, herded together behind the free citizens, behind the soldiers, behind the officers. They are the absolute lowest, most despised rung of human society.
But they bring their hoarded pennies. They buy cheap wax candles to offer to God. Because in that church, they feel, for one brief, fleeting moment, that in the eyes of God, they are equal to the wealthy merchants and the officers standing in the front rows.
And then the priest begins the service. He reads the prayer and he speaks the words, "Accept me, O Lord, even as the thief."
And the reaction of the convicts is extraordinary. When they hear those words, even as the thief, these hardened murderers, brigands, and violent smugglers fall to their knees.
They press their shaved foreheads to the cold stone floor. The entire church echoes with the violent clanking of 200 men in fetters hitting the ground.
They take the words completely literally. They identify with the thief on the cross beside Christ.
It's a moment of pure, staggering vulnerability. Dostoevsky stands there and looks at these men, these outcasts who are feared and despised by society, humbling themselves completely.
And in that moment, the disgust washes away. He stops seeing their crimes. He stops seeing their coarseness.
He looks at them and he sees the image of God shining through the dirt and the scars.
He realizes that true morality, true human goodness, isn't about rational self-interest. It's not about designing a perfect, comfortable socialist utopia where everyone behaves like a good little machine.
True morality is about recognizing the inherent dignity, the vast capacity for grace, and the absolute necessity of freedom within every single human soul, no matter how fallen or broken they appear.
He leaves Siberia with a profound belief that the Russian people, despite all their darkness and flaws, carry a deep, essential spiritual truth.
He went into that prison believing he could save the peasants with French political theories. He came out of that prison believing the peasants had saved him with their messy, contradictory, irrepressible humanity.
It is a total philosophical inversion, and it provides the deep bedrock foundation for every great novel he will write for the rest of his life.
Crime and Punishment, Notes from Underground, The Brothers Karamazov, every single one of them explores these themes of irrational freedom, the duality of human nature, guilt and redemption that he first discovered on the rotting floorboards of the dead house.
What an unbelievable journey. We started with a young intellectual facing a firing squad. He is thrown into a literal hell of freezing cold, crushing meaningless labor, and the suffocating psychological torment of forced communal living.
And that crucible destroyed his naive political theories. It taught him that human behavior cannot be explained by a clean, rational pursuit of pleasure.
He discovered that we have an irrational, absolute craving for freedom and dignity. Even if asserting that freedom causes us pain, like the convict deliberately blowing his savings just to prove he has a will of his own.
He exposed the physiological disease of absolute power, showing how tyranny inevitably corrupts the nervous system of those who wield it.
And ultimately, he resurrected his faith in humanity by recognizing that the darkest depravity and the most sublime grace often share the same heart. He found hope, and he found the image of God in the most despised outcasts of society.
It is a towering testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a profound, lasting warning about the dangers of reducing human beings to mechanical parts in any social system. Which leaves us with a final provocative thought, a question to take away from this deep dive and mull over. Dostoevsky discovered that true freedom isn't found in comfort. It isn't found in rational self-interest or perfectly optimized living. True freedom is found in the gritty, sometimes irrational assertion of one's own will. The absolute need to prove you are a human being, not a piano key, even when it hurts.
That's the core of it.
Look at our modern world. Think about your daily life. We are constantly, relentlessly told to optimize our existence. We treat ourselves like the algorithms Chernyshevsky dreamed of. We have apps to track our sleep cycles, our diets, our productivity. We're encouraged by every piece of technology and culture to avoid pain at all costs, to seek maximum comfort, to behave as perfectly rational consumers seeking a frictionless life. Everything is curated. Everything is safe.
We're building our own crystal palace.
It's exactly. Okay. But based on what we've learned from Dostoevsky's agonizing philosophical rebirth today, we have to ask, in our relentless modern pursuit of this perfectly optimized, comfortable, rational existence, are we actually suffocating the very thing that makes us uniquely human? Are we, in our perfectly comfortable, predictable, algorithmic routines, quietly locking ourselves in a different kind of deadhouse?